And speaking of love, our next treat is our speaker today. Rev. Phil Pierson is a pillar in the unity movement. He is one of my mentors. He's one of my inspirations. And along with his beloved wife, Reverend Dorothy, they brought this ministry from Lewis Street to this place. You are sitting here because, as he will tell you probably later, that he and Dorothy were at the right place at the right time. And we are eternally grateful for him and her to have us have this place. And I was very honored, privileged, as a matter of fact, to have Reverend Phil as my ordaining officer last Sunday. Will you please welcome my dear friend, one of this community's ohana, the Reverend Phil Pierson. You're in for a treat, folks. You're in for a treat.
It is so wonderful for me to be here with you today. I was sitting there being mindful of the fact that I can still remember the day that my wife Dorothy and I were walking our dog up in Wailaiki, and it was a moonlit night, and we stopped, and Dorothy looked at me and said, "We'll never leave Hawaii." And I looked at her and said, "We'll never leave Hawaii." And I thought, when you hitch your wagon to God, you never know what's coming. So, but we love Hawaii, and we've been fortunate to have it continue to be a part of our life, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. I want to say that I had told Judy what I was going to be talking about, and I have to tell you that if you saw anything about what I was going to be talking about, it isn't quite going to be that, because I got changed around, as so often happens, just by being here. And there were two things that happened. First of all, I was staying with my wonderful hostess, Pat Nielsen. She didn't like to stand up. Stand up, Pat Nielsen, for anybody. She deserves that, because to put up with me for 10 days is quite a thing. In any event, Pat said to me, "Let's go to a movie." Well, I don't go to many movies, but I thought, well, that sounds like a great idea. So we went to a matinee. And I said, "What's the name of the movie?" And she said, "A Dog's Purpose." How many of you have seen A Dog's Purpose? One? Okay. Well, anyway, I thought, well, A Dog's Purpose. So we went to the theater, and we went up and saw that for senior citizens, matinee, it was $11.50 each. I thought, well, this is Hawaii, all right. But I then discovered that this was sort of special. She said, "Now, where do you want to sit? Because this is all reserved seating." I said, "Reserved seating in a theater?" And so she volunteered. She said, "I'll give you these two seats right in the middle." I thought, "Oh, that's pretty great. We'll be right in the middle." So anyway, we would go in, and sure enough, this beautiful theater, brand new looking inside, but there was nobody there. So we sat right in those two front seats, all by our little selves. But that movie was so good. I cried, Pat cried, and it wasn't just because it was sad, but it had so many beautiful things. And we discovered, as the movie made very clear, that the dog's purpose in being was to be a friend, And in each case, that dog helped to make the lives of the people whose pet it was. So I thought, wow, it's so clear what a dog's purpose is, but I wonder how many people know what their purpose is. And as I thought about that, I realized that I'm pretty sure I'd be on safe ground. And I thought about Sky, because you know how Sky would like to walk down and take his microphone, and I'll never forget the one he did about France. Those of you who were here when Sky was here and had the menu, remember, and you go and say, "What would you like on today's menu?" And they said, whatever you like, that's what you're going to get. Only did it all in a French accent, you know. Anyway, I thought, what if I walked down here, you know, and said, I'm not going to do this to you, though. But I said, what's your purpose in being alive? I mean, what is your purpose in being alive? It's an incredible question. But unfortunately, no, I won't say unfortunately, just where we are, I could almost guarantee you that we'd come up with maybe 50 different purposes at least. Some would say, I'm here for my grandchildren. I'm sure I was just born to be their grandparents because they're so special. Or somebody else would say, well, you know, I think I was born to do the work I'm doing. I'm really influencing the people in a very positive way. And anyway, you can probably think off the top of your head, what would you say if I just came around and asked you, now, what's your purpose? Well, I had something else happen this week that I think added to our thinking through this question. And that is that I was told that one of the great people of Hawaii, Eddie Kamai, had just made his passing and was going to have a service at the Elks Club, and that I would be included in that service. And so I was looking forward to that. But something different happened, and I put that in quotes, that I wasn't able to go. But I said, well, you know, I'm going to read the book, because somebody had given me the book about him. It's called Hawaiian Sun. So I read this book, and I thought, this man lived his life the way we all need to live our life, in terms of knowing that there is a spirit that goes before you that makes your way easy if you make the connection. And all through the book, not all through the book, but in several instances in the book, he said, I get goose pimples when he was, say, interviewing someone. And I should stop to say, in case you don't know Eddie, he is one of the great musical figures in Hawaiian history. And he made the ukulele famous around the world because of his incredible capacity with it. But he was also a student of Hawaiiana, and he particularly liked to find the old ones, people who had lived a great time. And so he brought that to it too. I also, as I opened the book, found that we had a likeness in the fact that his grandfather came from Hawaii, or from Sacramento. He was from Hawaii, but had gone to Sacramento during the gold rush. And also that he was born in the same year that I was born. So I felt a kinship with him before I started to read the book. But as I read the book, as I said, he had these places where he'd get these goosebumps because he said, this was all prepared for me. When he'd go to see one of the old ones would say, I knew you were coming. Though he'd had no communication with him, and he'd get goosebumps because he said he knew something had gone before him to make his way. And then I came across a part in this book that I particularly enjoyed so much. Eddie said that he had a great attraction to dragonflies, that he'd find so often we'd go somewhere, dragonflies would just seem to be all around him. And on the particular day that he wrote about in the book, he tells about the fact that the band had been on Maui and had done a performance and were going to the airport then to fly back to Oahu. And he had noticed that one of his dragonflies was hanging around the window and just sitting there. And so he'd gone over to the window and he was communicating with that dragonfly. And the guys would knock on the door and say, come on, Eddie, we got to go. You know, if we don't leave now, we're going to miss the plane. Eddie said, I hear you. And he just kept concentrating on his dragonfly because he felt so drawn to that. And then in the last paragraph, he had this to say. He said he'd asked people what they felt about his attraction to the dragonflies and how he felt this spiritual connection. He said, I asked some people about this, and they say the piano, it's not piano, but I believe that's the word for that kind of spiritual connection. He said, that's your amakua, your ancestral spirit is guiding you. He said, I don't know about that for sure. You see, on my mother's side, It's the mono, the shark. All I know is I see my piano and things happen. Everything just opens up the right way. Things I hope for and wish for, they appear. I don't know how to explain it, but I've seen it so many times. All I can say is, it's my friend, and I let it go at that. When Dorothy and I came here, we were fortunate to have some people who were really born and raised in Hawaii and had their ancestry in Hawaii, and they told us such fantastic stories. I remember how they said when they would go fishing, they would have their prayer location at that area, and they would do their prayer work, and how they would watch the sharks would come together and herd the fish into the harbor, and they would go out and just pick them up practically with nets. And again, someone who doesn't know what we know in unity and what Hawaiians know is that you have a connection with everything. But in particular, this reinforced for me what I got out of the concept of purpose. And I realized as I was appreciating Eddie's work and his sense of oneness with nature and his commitment to the fact that his life seemed to be ordered for him, doors just opened for him easily in that consciousness. I realized when we ask ourselves and each other, what is the purpose of life? It came to me so strongly, the primary purpose of everybody's life is exactly the same thing. Exactly the same. It is to build our connection to the creative mind of the universe, which for some people may express itself through the sharks. For some other people, through the dragonfly. It doesn't matter what in the physical earth the connection is made through. The primary is the relationship to the mind that has created the universe. As we know, God is not a man in the sky. God is universal mind in which we literally move and have our being. We have thoughts in the mind of God. But to fulfill our true purpose of being, we need to make the connection to God so that God can channel all that He is through your uniqueness. I love this because, again, if I had my little microphone went around and I snap pictures so that you could all see, I'd say, look at everybody. Everybody's unique. There's not a soul in this room that is exactly the same, and you won't find anybody in the world who looks just like you or expresses just like you. Even perfect twins don't do that. The Spirit expresses uniquely through our consciousness. Only, however, if we make the connection. It isn't a question of keeping the Ten Commandments perfectly. I'm going to tell you some stories about my life, and they're going to sound like, whoa, he must be somebody special. But I can assure you, I'm not special. I am as imperfect as anybody in this room, and perhaps a little bit more than some in some areas. But if we make the connection, God will take you just as you are and work through you to do something that is not only special use of your talents and capabilities, but do it in going ahead of you and making it easy. And that's my big flag that I wave all the time. Life is not meant to be hard. It's meant to be easy. And when I say easy, I don't mean easy, laid back, do nothing. I mean get things done, and it'll get done ahead of you, like Eddie did. So let me tell you some stories by beginning just how we got this church. We didn't get this church by going out to realtors and say, this is what we need, and would you please find it for us? But rather, one day, a realtor called us and said, I heard you're looking for a church. Well, the owner has just dropped the price. Would you be interested in looking at it? And when I heard where it was, I said, we'll be right there. And so, anyway, this property came to us. We didn't have to labor to find it. The same thing is true of the property we bought next door. And that at one time was where the English council lived. And in any event, we knew we needed more room if we were going to grow, and so we gave thanks for it, and lo and behold, the same thing happens there. We offered a price, and they said, forget it, you're not even in our league. We're holding this property to make money. So anyway, some months later, we get a call and say, are you still interested in making that offer at your price? If you can put up the money right away, the owner's in financial trouble and wants to sell. Wow, things are getting really good now, aren't they? So we have this beautiful setting here in Hawaii, and we didn't make it happen. It happened for us. And all we're endeavoring to do to the best of our ability is to make the connection as our primary purpose. Not to figure out how we're going to do all this. Because sometimes there are no answers. How are you going to afford something? You know, it's like when Dorothy and I began this work, I think we were making, I think they paid us $600 a month or something like that. And we were doing okay in those days. We had a nice, brand new apartment right over here. It's just opened on, I can't think of the name of it, but it was right down the road here. That's why I came and looked at this property, because when he called, I said, oh, that's right down the road from us. And we just walked down here to look at it. But in any event, Dorothy and I were happy, and we had our nice apartment there. Go out in our lanai and look up on Diamond Head. But one day, one of the members of the church came to me and said, you know, my husband had retired. He was in charge of a huge plantation for C.H. Sugar. And we have come home, as you know, because we knew her well. And she said, we built our brand new home in Waialaiki. And she said, we furnished it with things we've gathered through the years and our travels and all. And she said, he just came back to me and said that the board had had a meeting, and the man who had replaced him, the people who worked on the plantation, were revolting against him, and we need you to go back for a year. And she said to Ned, I'm not going back unless the Piersons will live in our house. And so anyway, that's when she came to my office and said, would you and Dorothy live in our house? So we moved into a brand new house overlooking the ocean. Waialae Country Club and the Kahala Hotel was just been built. Beautiful setting. We lived there not 1 year, 3 years until we left Hawaii. We left from that house. Could you have figured that out intellectually? How do you go from a little apartment to a beautiful home, brand new, overlooking the ocean for nothing? I couldn't have figured that out, and I didn't. So anyway, folks, those are some samples of how it happens. When Dorothy and I were called to leave here, and I won't take you to that story, but it was very intuitive. We both knew we had to go, whether we wanted to go or not, to Sacramento. And when we got there, the church was having great problems, and that's why I was asked to go there. And they had no church. They'd been meeting in a Crest Theater there for a number of years. And so when we got there, we felt one thing they needed that would help to restore the spirit of the congregation would be find their own property. And so we did intellectually the thing to do is we started looking around for property we could find that would be right in downtown Sacramento, because that's where the Crest Theater was, and that was an important thing for the congregation. Well, we didn't find anything intellectually, and so one day, however, we were going to a Sunday school teachers meeting, and one of the new women who volunteered for the Sunday school said, is it okay if my husband comes along? She said, he doesn't go to the church, but he just said he wanted to go with me. So I said, well, I'll ask. And I said, well, sure, fine. So this gentleman gets in the front seat of the car with me, and we're driving along, and I'm thinking, making conversation. So I said, what this church of ours needs is a place where we can have our own home, own church home, right in downtown Sacramento. And he looked at me for a minute, and he said, well, my boss owns an old bowling alley. He said, it's right opposite Capitol Park. Well, we'd never seen that. And he said, I'll give you the realtor's name. Well, anyway, to make the long story short, we looked at it. It was all in disrepair. It had been empty for 3 years. But anyway, it turned out to be the most fantastic fantastic location right opposite Capitol Park. People who worked in the Capitol would come over for our meditation time at noon. We restored the building to make it a beautiful building. But folks, 15 years later, one of our associate ministers said, "You know what I found in an old Unity magazine that showed where the earliest Unity churches were ever located?" I said, "No." He said, "The first Unity church in Sacramento was in a house at 1415 L Street. The address of the bowling alley was 1415 L Street." I love that story because it's like, again, the Spirit saying, I just want you to know this is for real. This is for real. I got another story like that I want to tell you, but I want to back up a little bit in my thought and say I want to share something else that I think the people in the first service enjoyed, and perhaps you will too. And that is, I one time was asked, I was a senior at the school I was at, and we had a dance, and we had dance cards. And so one of the juniors came to me and said, "Have you got an opening on your dance card for my girlfriend?" Big shot. I said, "Oh, sure. What's her name?" And so anyway, I put her name down in my dance book. And so when the dance came, I danced with this lovely 17-year-old girl. But I couldn't have guessed that later that same evening, that dance would turn into the fact that she would be in my arms. And I would be holding her. She'd be crying and saying, "Don't make me go. Don't make me go." Well, I pull this story out when people are sitting around trying to top one another with special stories. I pulled this one out that I just told you and said, what makes the story interesting is that when I danced with her that night, her name was Jacqueline Bouvier. And it became, of course, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, and then Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis. So that was pretty hard for most people to top. Anyway, I won't tell you all the things that go with it because we don't have time. Holy smokes! Where did the time go? I must have been dragging this thing down. I had a lot more stories in the first service, didn't I? Okay, I got one more I'll tell you quickly. Don't anybody leave before they take the offering, please. But I love this story. I love this story because, again, it puts the stamp that says you couldn't have intellectualized this. Many people hear stories like this and say, "Oh, well, synchronicity." I mean, it's just synchronicity. How we got on television when we went to Sacramento and we served 100,000 people every week on our television program, you know. Anyway, we didn't do that. So, but somebody could say, "Oh, the way that happened is you tell a story." It's synchronicity. Okay, this is a story when I found out I wanted to be a minister. And so I didn't know anything about Unity. I was very active in the Episcopal Church. But when I talked to the bishop, suddenly what I had discovered in my reading of the Bible, that we were all like Jesus, the bishop and I didn't get along too well on that conversation. And so I started looking for other ministries I might be involved in. And I couldn't find anything. And nobody connected with me. So anyway, I went back into business. I worked for Standard & Poor's with one of their regional managers. And then I got drafted and spent time overseas during the Korean War. And instead of fighting the Korean front, they made me a manager of football and a baseball team instead. And anyway, when I came back from France, I said, "Now I'm not going back in business. I'm going to be a minister." And so I made connections again, and I went down to Washington and met with the biggest Unitarian minister there was, and again, we didn't click. So I remember this was 3 years after I had decided that I wanted to be a minister. I remember going home that night, and the guys I was staying with, they were all going to a party, and I said, you guys, I'm going to stay home. And I remember, because I was still sort of Episcopalian, I got down on my knees and I said, dear God, somebody must need me. Somebody must need me. Those were my very words. I got off my knees, got back in bed. It's now 10 o'clock at night. Suddenly the phone rings. I pick up the phone. No, I thought, should I answer that? I thought it might be my friend calling me, so I answered it. And he said, is Phil Pierson there? I said, this is Phil Pierson. He says, this is Bill Darling. Well, Bill Darling was the vice president of Standard & Poor's Corporation. If you know that, it's the biggest investment advisory firm in the world. This is the vice president. And I had worked for him in that one time I had. But in any event, his first words to me when I said, this is Phil Pierson, he said, Phil, I need you. And so when people tell me, well, it's just synchronicity when these things work for, no. Those stamps says, hey, there's something big working. Okay, I got to wind up. I apologize to the president of the board down here for talking so long today, but I want you to know that you do have a primary purpose in your life. It hasn't got anything to do with physical in your life or your physical connections. It's a connection to God that you and I need to build, as Jesus told us to. Love God with all your heart and soul and mind, which means you have to be as close to that relationship as my friend Eddie was looking at that little, what did I say that was? Yeah, dragonfly. Just as close as he felt at that moment that he was willing to miss a plane for it. So as you do that, then all the rest will fall in place. You don't have to make life happen. It'll happen to you. A word that came to me was, when you surrender your life to God in love, God will give it back to you on a silver platter. God bless you, my friend. God bless you.